Hello, everyone. Glad you're here. Welcome to the Bread of Life channel. I'm here with Phil Duncalfe, and Phil he does a lot of stuff online. He has a channel called The Hell Project, which is the first way we connected because he's also, like me, an annihilationist. We don't believe in eternal conscious torment in hell. So he also has a channel called Critical Witness, and he's no longer working on that. But do you want to talk about any of your projects, Phil?
Those Hell Project's the main one. So if anyone wants to go and look up youtube.com at the Hell Project, it seems like YouTube does the @ symbol now, or just youtube.com/the Hell Project. That's me. The Critical Witness is still there. There's still about 50 conversations with different apologists, Christians, covering various different topics. It was done in pandemic, so that's the context. It was very much a pandemic podcast, along with the thousands of others. So they're a resource, but my mate and I got a little bit less available due to pandemic loosening up and things like that. So so that's kind of the project online that I'm doing. But I work for a charity here in England called Friends International. So it's a Christian ministry that supports international students in a local university, but they work across the UK and Ireland, welcoming international students, helping them settle. And if people are interested in learning about the gospel, then that's part of our role as well. And so I'm a chaplain at the local university here as part of my work with Friends International. So that's a little bit, I guess that's a project as well. Anything else that you want to know about me?
Cool. Well, that's great. Well, I mean, I guess we can start with what we're talking about today, which is when there are problems in the church, lots of, and this unfortunately happens where churches abuse their power. And up until last year, you were a leader in your church, and then, you just had a really bad experience. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So do you want to talk about being a leader at your church?
Yeah. So as part of, I've been where I am at the moment. I'm in a town called Guildford since I was at university. I met my wife at university. We've been around Guildford for the last, I won't say how old I am, a good while, almost 17 or 18 years. And this was the church that we both had decided to go to as students. We've been there for 16 years. 6-7 years ago, I was asked to be an elder. I was quite young to be an elder, but that's the sort of move that I think churches like mine make. It was a non-denominational church. It was very much an emphasis on male leadership, and I'm sure that will come up through more that we talk about. It was, from all intents and purposes, it was a good church that had accountability structures in there. We were part of a group of churches, both sort of had different layers to it. So it had what was called a sphere for the Christian lingo, a sphere, and then it had a more national and broader sort of umbrella name as well. You can find all the details. I probably won't go into too much detail with names as much as I can, partly because my blog's been called Slander and Defamation, so I don't want to go into any further fuel for them. So if you want to see the full detail, minus a few things that I'm still not willing to share at this point, but I've got a blog called asimpleblog.online. And the category church has all my sort of reflections and the detail there. So you're more than welcome to have a look at that. It has a little bit more specifics. So I'll keep things general at the moment. But that's
the link to that, his blog, is in the description if anybody wants to check it out. So I just want to mention really quick. So your church was what in general people would consider a good church.
Oh, yeah.
And so this isn't even talking about churches that are cultish and abusing their power in very overt ways on a regular basis. Your church was basically you considered it a good church for all this time. So it wasn't a church that was overtly cultish or, overtly abusive. So that's,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's all those things that you kind of look for, the welcome particularly, and it's interesting talking to the people. So a lot of people have left that church since the mess that we'll talk about in a minute. And talking to people as we go around other churches, there was something about the church we were in where the welcome, we seemed to do that really well. People felt welcome, felt known, didn't feel pressured into like one corner or the other with regards to doctrine. They knew where the church stood on doctrine, but they didn't feel under pressure. So there was things that we were definitely getting right. And yeah, as I said, like it's the things you look for in churches. Are the leaders accountable? And even for myself, when I was an elder, who am I accountable to? And yeah, we can talk again about the theology there. I think what the mess showed was a difference in what I viewed as who I was accountable to, as to who my fellow elders thought they were accountable to. But overall, yeah, it was going really well. And then there was a big leadership change about 4 years ago. The guy who had planted the church, he moved on. Sadly, there's a bit of mess in his story, but that's his story. I won't go into that. That potentially could have been a red flag for things going on with where things went for me. But yeah, I think things started to unravel around the pandemic, but also around this new leader who kind of was parachuted in to then lead the church. So while I was an elder who had been consistent through the time, this guy was fairly new, and then another elder joined the team. So there's three of us when things started going wrong. Yeah, so that's
okay. So what went wrong? What happened?
Yeah, so what went wrong? So I'm going to try and keep it like I don't want the next hour to be my story really. In one sense, I guess I need to frame it with this. It doesn't make sense still. So I'm about 14 months on from the mess. When the mess really first started, we're talking about October 21 when it really started kicking off. And to this day, there's a whole load of it that just doesn't make sense. It escalated far beyond what it should have done. And yeah, so it was a fairly straightforward grievance. Someone wasn't doing their job. I don't know if this relates in the States of interest in your position. We have trustees. So the way the church operates is as a charity, because the government is very generous to charities, and there's 25% gift aid on top of donations. So there's evidence that you're doing things as a church that benefit the community, so that you're part of that. And as part of the accountability, again, the accountability structures, you have trustees who manage the sort of finances, the operating within the law, and then reporting to the charity commission. So these trustees also have potentially powers over like salary and things like that. They're technically your employer. And one of these trustees, the chair of the trustees at the time, there were several things that were going on all at once. He was incredibly busy, but that didn't excuse him not doing one of the jobs that he was meant to do. And then the operations manager was trying to say, hey, can you get these things done? And it became both the not getting the job done, but also the responses were quite curt, quite harsh. And then just to sort of add the complexity, there was sort of history there where he had to apologize to the operations manager in the past as well for his behavior. And so there's this kind of history, relational, and then there's a bit of sort of employment issue within the grievance. But because it hadn't been dealt with verbally, it then escalated like out of control. So the operations management is my friend, still my friend, came to me, said, look, I've tried to say these things aren't happening. I'm not getting anywhere. Can you help? I then took it to the elders. Here's the verbal issues. Here's also what I know of the history, because as I said, this new elder had come in. And so he had been told about the issues, but hadn't been involved in them. I said, look, this isn't appropriate. We need to just stand this guy down so we can get him away from the situation and then work it through. Sort of relationally as a church, I thought that was a fairly obvious way to handle it. I was told that was too punitive to stand this guy down, which was very bizarre, but basically it became an impasse between me and the other two elders, and then it just sort of escalated from there. From there, there was pressure put on my friend to write the grievance, and as anyone who's done any sort of grievance related work, as soon as it's written and it becomes official, that's when it's like up a notch. And that was an eldership decision, not her. There's multiple emails which are, I'm uncomfortable with this email. I'm uncomfortable with writing it down. That's not what I want. But it was very much if you don't do this, you don't trust the elders, and that's a bigger problem. So it's like already there's pressure on the operations manager to do something she's not comfortable with. And so then it escalates. We then get the accountability structure involved. Two guys come in. Before we really say anything, they're like, I've spoken to my solicitors. You need to, here are your options. And they gave us options of like HR firm and a solicitor. Like those are the options. Like there was no like third option of, hold on, let's just take a step back. Let's calm it down. I'm basically operations manager wrote a very good grievance. It was very technical in the language. It had, did say organizational abuse. It did have bullying in there. Like she wrote very clearly, but it just, I think it just freaked these guys out. And instead of being the wise ones, they went, okay, let's slow things down. Let's work this through relationally. It became, you guys need to lawyer up. But it was, and again, this is where things start to really not make sense. We agreed as a team, we don't want to lawyer up because that would escalate things. And there are verses where it's like, don't take people to court. Solicitors are probably the last thing to do. And so I get this email the following day from one of the elders saying, I've just instructed a local HR consultancy firm. And it should have been a bit of a red flag, but it ended in LLP, which is a law practice. But because he had couched it in this, they're an HR firm, that's kind of where we're right. Let's get someone outside who can talk this through, keep the relationships intact, and work it out without having anything like law involved. And turns out this was a tribunal specialist. So this guy's like whole role is to keep the church out of the law courts. Every bit of communication I had for the first 3 or 4 months by email were all saying this was an HR firm. And at multiple points, they even dropped that it was a Christian HR firm. And when we get into the specifics, the tribunal specialist was a Christian. The law firm wasn't. Like so the wording is all starts to get very weird.
But now at that point, were you still going to church and were you still serving as an elder?
Yep.
And how were the elders treating you at that time?
So at that time, it wasn't that much of a clash between us. It was starting to get there. The direction was more about the concern for the operations manager and also the concern for the person whose the grievance was against. The guy who the grievance was against, he didn't know anything for like the best part of 2 months. And that was problematic in itself. So I don't think he was treated at all well through the process. Interesting, he's still in the church, and the operations manager, like myself, and not part of the church. But there looks sort of again on reflection, like the first meeting we had about the incident, the raising it verbally, there were several red flags. I won't go into the details of those, but there were several red flags that the relationship wasn't what I thought it was. Just on that, I brought the verbal grievance, spent about 40 minutes going, here's the history, here's the issue, here's how we go about it. The very next thing was a gear change to basically tell me off for being late to stuff. Like it was a very weird situation of like, we're not going to deal with this guy where there's a verbal grievance against him and serious issue of like 10-year history, but we are going to deal with you for turning up late to a couple of things. And the wording there that sort of sticks and follows through the clash of theology around eldership was, I was told I wouldn't be able to line manage you if you worked for the church. So that was the theology of, like, my theology of eldership is a team of elders, equal in role. There was some business speak going on with his view of his role as a church leader. So it was straight away, I'm going to defend this guy, but Phil, you're a problem. Like, that was kind of, and I didn't really clock it then. It obviously stung because it stuck in my memory, but it was just one of those weird things of, like, I think I'm in a battle here, but I don't quite know why. I still don't know why we didn't just stand the guy down and deal with it relationally. So yeah, I feel like I've talked quite a bit. So there's quite a bit there.
Yeah. So I think, but the main thing was that you got pushed out of the church, even though you were an elder. They basically just stonewalled you and pushed you out.
Yeah.
Without dealing with the conflict.
Yeah. So there's like 3 months off where I'm at. So to try and draw it in, it kind of escalated to trustees investigating trustees. So, like, first off, the trustees investigating the trustees. That was the initial interaction. The solicitor was just advising, didn't do any of the on the ground interviews or anything. And then, because the trustees missed a whole load of information, didn't deal with some of the bits in the grievance, and basically insinuated that the church, the operations manager, was basically just should get over it. She appealed. That was the process, and then it happened again. So that the remaining two trustees then investigate the work of the trustees, and the trustees are all friends. Like, they're all, so it's starting to, like, and that's when relationally between the elders, I was like, guys, this isn't right. This isn't impartial. This isn't fair. Miscommunication was going off left, right, and center. Things were being withheld from us elders by the trustees, which wasn't right. And it was just all mess. And so it started off like, guys, this is wrong. By the time it got to the last 2 weeks of my eldership, we had a mediation meeting that went terribly between the church operation manager and us elders. And by that time, it was quite clear that the other two elders had been meeting without me. They brought new information into this mediation bit that was, like, quite clearly wrong. To summarize the sort of vibe of that meeting, it ended with me basically saying that the lead pastor has been spiritually abusive. That's the vibe of the meeting. I can talk about that later if people are interested. But that was, obviously didn't end well. And then it came to the last elders meeting, which was basically me drawing it to a conclusion myself. They'd dropped multiple hints the previous 3 weeks, but never once came out and said, Phil, you need to, like, you're behaving badly, you're insulting us, you're accusing us of X, Y, Z. You need to watch what you're doing, otherwise we think your eldership might have to come to an end. The closest they came to that was, Phil, you need to review your role in this team. And so when I asked, like, what does that mean? That they just repeated the phrase. And so, like, okay, so things aren't healthy. So I gave an email, still got an email where I responded, here's where I'm at. We clearly aren't agreeing. I think God's called me to be in this church, to be part of this, to work this through. Clearly, we're not talking on the same wavelength. But if this is about me stepping down, we need to seriously talk about that. And they didn't for 3 weeks. And then we got to this final elders meeting. And then they asked me the question again. So, like, Phil, where do you think you should be? And I was like, no. I've already given you that email. I've responded to that. You need to tell me what you're meaning by this and what you think should be happening. And then it was like, you need to stand down. I said, give me the reasons. And the reason, none of them were biblical. Things were like, I was too close to the operations manager. So I was prioritizing my friendship over my elder role. Even down to, again, the capacity and timeliness thing came up again. And it was like, no, you haven't, this isn't, these aren't biblical. These aren't right. And so the next day I sent in my resignation. I was like, I don't know if you resigned from eldership, but it was basically, guys, this isn't working. I stand down. I disagree with all the reasons you've given. But this obviously isn't appropriate. And then yeah, then they had church meetings without me, where they then talked about me to the church, talked about the church operation manager to the church, said all sorts of things like, I'm just angry. So it's all very much like blame Phil, talk about Phil, put it all on Phil, while also being really unclear. And we can talk about how they control the meeting. So it then was like, I was blocked from Facebook, blocked from church meetings, and I had no recourse really to then put it on my blog, because that was the only way anyone was going to see my side of the story.
Yeah, so basically you recognized a grievance of someone that's also in the church leadership, and rather than address that grievance, they turned it like against, like everything is your fault basically, rather than ever address that. And like the thing that I noticed as you were writing on your blog about this is how much emotional pain you went through over this, because it was like, this was a church that you had been part of for so long. This is where all your like a lot of your relationships were, and like you really were close with these people. So to be like just kind of passive aggressively shut out was really hard.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about the emotional aspect of it?
Yeah, and that was the toll. I think probably the hardest part was when I'd been asked to stand down and trying to figure out how to let people I know, who people knew me. Like, that's one thing I've clung on to throughout the whole mess, was people knew me. They knew I cared for them. They knew that I took my role of elder seriously, in the sense of being a pastor. Like, I had to work hard at that. I had to make sure that I was available for people, and so I was also aware that as a pastor, you are transparent, that people don't see your worst side as well as your best side, and when they see your worst side, you own up and you apologize as quickly as you can, and you own it. And you and there were various times in my eldership where I cling on to, that's who I was, and who I am is someone who can own being a jerk, being told that I'm a jerk, and being able to then go, okay, I'm really sorry, I hurt you with that, and I'll do my best to make sure that that never happens again. And so that's kind of the stuff that I was working on, but also aware that the significant portion of the church that who knew me were getting weird information that, again, like as I said at the start, it just didn't make sense what I was hearing about myself, what I was being told. Like, I tell these guys, I don't trust the process, this is a problem, and all I get back is trust the process. Like, this doesn't work, guys. Like, I'm expecting, like, here's the specifics of why I don't trust it. I'm expecting you to ease my mind about those specifics, and nothing's coming back. So the 2 weeks, the emotional toll was the 2 weeks of like, I don't know how I'm going to get people to hear my side of the story without being the one who's angry, without being the one who's like trying to be the victim, without being the one who's undermining the church. Like, all those things of, prior to this mess, I was feeding our eldership team with like, hey, look, there's the Ravi Zacharias mess. Let's read some books to make sure this doesn't happen to us. So like Diane Langberg, her Redeeming Power book. There's a bunch of podcasts from Glenn Scrivener around the Ravi Zacharias mess, trying to unpick church abuse. So I was like, this can't be us. This can't be what we're doing. And so I was aware of all that. And as you can probably hear, like, just untangling all this mess was just so tiring. Like, I wasn't sleeping. I was trying to do work, trying to also deal with family at the time. So it was just, probably like, if you go back 2 years and see the last interview that Rebecca had with me, you can hear about my backstory with my daughter and her special needs. Like, there was stuff going on in there in the background at the same time. So it was all kind of like, well, my daughter's diagnosis was one of the most difficult times in my life. I would say I was sleeping less in this time. I was probably reaching for the whiskey bottle to help me sleep a little bit too often. Like, just mental health stuff was, I was pretty much in the pits for best part of 2 or 3 weeks, and probably more so in this situation just because it was relationally tied to people that I really cared about. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and
Thread things together.
I had a lot of sympathy for what you were going through, because I have been through this with a church too. A church passive aggressively pushed me out as well. Like, I brought a grievance to the pastor, and he kept saying he was going to meet with me. He put me off for like months and months and months, never did meet with me. Finally agreed to meet with my husband, not with me. Right. And so anyway, I've been through this, and that was probably like one of the most painful experiences that I've had in my life, because so many of my relationships were connected to that. And so it was kind of felt like a betrayal of my friends who stayed at that church. It was very painful because, that it felt like they were betraying me,
Yes.
And so did you experience some of that, where you had like people that, you were close to, and then you felt betrayed by them because they kind of sided with the church?
That's one grace in this, is that there's only 2 people in this whole mess that have told me I've done well. No, they haven't even told me I've done anything wrong. That's the thing. They've talked crap about me to the church, but I ended up actually doing mediation with the pastor, which was a waste of time, sadly. But he basically told me I hadn't sinned, and I'm kind of, this is like the bit that doesn't make sense. I'm like, but if I haven't sinned, like, you're telling me my blog is propaganda and defamation. You're telling me that I was angry without cause. You've told me to stand down from an elder, and like, how have I not sinned? Like, all these things are just so bizarre. So yeah, sorry, what was the question? I was just kind of
did it feel like, was there a feeling of betrayal with like people who chose to stay at the church, or did most of your friends kind of go with you?
Yeah, most people left over time. Like, there were several waves of leaving the church. It was really, from like an objective side of things, it was really interesting to watch that I didn't actually have to do much. And I think part of that is the character of the operations manager spoke for her, the character of people who'd been advocating for us, who had sort of become part of this. So I'm seeing some questions in I'll just bring context for the Jerome.
Okay, yeah, Jerome. Yep.
So just to say what denomination it was, I'll just say New Frontiers, part of the New Frontiers family churches. So it's a church planting movement, which then explains the next question, which is elder. Being called an elder is part of the sort of leadership team. So I hope that helps. So with when they did this church meeting that we weren't invited to, they sort of shot themselves in the foot. So they padded it out with prayers and worship. So they really limited the question time. They then, before the question time, like, put in 5 or 6, like, be careful how you ask this, be careful about people around you. Like, it was very much tone policing the kind of questions people could ask. And then when they like gave their spiel about what had happened, they weren't actually clear in what had happened to me. They kind of expected people to just ignore that they'd asked me to stand down. So they just, and then they had this guy from the oversight then speak. And it was probably one of the most, I'm glad I wasn't in the room actually, because it was just really weird what he then said about me. He spent about 5 to 10 minutes just basically saying both the church operations manager and myself how magnificent and wonderful we were, gave no explanation for why we were being asked to step down. And then it was like, you're through a storm, you're almost through the storm, but stand with these guys, like, stand with these elders. And fortunately, this was a good church. Like, the congregation knew how to discern, and they knew how to go, this isn't right. This isn't who I know Phil to be. This isn't the gospel. something's off. And a handful of people left straight after that meeting. They messaged me and said, we're done with this church. We're gone. We can't stick with what they're doing. And then just gradually others were like, we're going to stick. Phil, they messaged me and they were like, Phil, we know you haven't done anything wrong. We're with you. Just to let you know, we're sticking with this to try and bring some reconciliation and try and get this right. And it didn't. And so there was this wave after wave of people like, we've tried. We've gone to the elders and we said, look, you didn't handle this right. You haven't explained. All I had to do was just say, this is what happened. Because what they were doing was twisting narratives. It was really quite clear they were twisting things to try and get things okay, and not take like so a clear point where people were like, what have you, so they said sorry a lot, but they never said clearly what they were sorry for. So, and that was what people were saying to them, like, you said sorry, but we're not sure what you've actually said sorry for. You've said sorry for church operations manager's feelings and her perception of things. You've not said sorry to Phil. And just over and over and over again, they just kept shooting themselves in the foot, that people were like, okay, well, you're not giving us clarity. You're not giving us the full truth here. And you're also not repenting. So what can we do but leave? And then there was a few people that were quite late on leaving. And when they did, there was no pastoral care for them to stay. Like, there was nothing. It was basically like, go find a church, be blessed in this other church, but we're not going to talk about this anymore. We've said what we need to. And so their line was, we did the right thing. We did what we could. We made a few mistakes, but we're going to move on and we're going to leave it behind. And that's kind of the way it went.
What effect did that have on your faith during the time?
Yeah, it's a weird one. Throughout the whole thing, like, yeah, I said I was reaching for the whiskey bottle more than I should have been, but it weirdly didn't impact my faith in anything other than the church. So, like, and I think that's partly because I've grown up in multiple different churches, and as I said, I had my eye on things from Ravi Zacharias when that mess happened. I had my eye on several different things that happened in UK church after that. I've been reading things like Diane Langberg, and I was just very aware that the way the church operates at the moment, it's a matter of when these things happen. I had hoped that doing that sort of prep would have allowed it not to end in the way that it did, but it was, yeah, I mean, in terms of, I view church very differently. That's the biggest impact. In terms of my faith, I think God has graciously given me eyes to see that it might happen. And yeah, I think that's his provision in that. He'd also graciously provided people in that church who were loyal to him and not loyal to the brand, not loyal to and that's where I think a lot of it goes wrong, is victims come forward and say, hey, this is wrong, and then you get well, look at the good that this brand is doing. You can't bring this because you're going to affect our witness, and people get flattened and squashed by the brand, by the movement, by all the good that they do. And fortunately, I guess some of the graces of this church had always been a little bit on the fringes of this movement. We'd done a little bit of our own thing for a while. And so when it came to this mess, everyone was like, well, we believe Jesus, we believe people should be treated better than this, and we believe in repentance and humility. We're not seeing those things, so we'll go find a church that has it. And I guess that's why where I'm at, though, is I thought we had it, and I struggle now to go into a church and hear certain words of like team, and I'm part of the leadership team, and it's a trigger for me now. As I was a part of the leadership team, and I thought I trusted my brothers in leadership. They said all the right things up until they didn't. And I guess that's the struggle, is you can't really know who you're dealing with till a crisis point comes along. And that's the bit that's shifted. Faith-wise, God's fortunately remained faithful, and I don't have any reason to deny him or be frustrated at God, because I guess I'm aware suffering and crap happens in life. That's kind of been the theology that I've been working to. Humans operate in a sinful way, and they do so in the church. And at the moment, it just seems like God is bringing this into light in multiple churches in multiple ways, and just saying, this isn't the behavior that I want. These aren't the leaders I choose. And we can talk more about that, but that'll be where I'm kind of coming from now.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious about what, like, you think now about church. Like, how do you think church should be structured? Because you thought that one was good, but now you're seeing that, okay, well, it wasn't. So what do you think should be done now?
Oh, sorry, yeah, I've just seen it.
churches?
Well, can you define what you mean by brand? Now, that's a good question. So, what I mean by brand, there's been something on my radar for a little while, especially in non-denominational evangelical churches. So we're part of a church planting movement. If you don't know what that is, it's been around a while, so there did seem to be enough accountability further up. Some church planting movements are so young that there's no higher hierarchy. So in that sense, it's hard to find the accountability.
It's like non-denominational churches that do well, and then they want to promote their idea of how church should be done, and they like plant new churches and stuff. Like the Vineyard was a church planting movement. I mean, and then Calvary Chapel was kind of the same kind of thing. And then did you mention?
Yeah,
was
so it's
it
called
Frontier?
New Frontiers is the group.
Okay.
And then there's because it's been around since the 70s, they've now got like multiple layers. So it's New Frontiers is like the umbrella term. They have these different spheres. Commission was the one that I was in. There's like Catalyst and New Ground and a bunch of others. And then the local church operates all on its own independently, but in relationship with these wider structures. And that's where some of the accountability breaks down, because in terms of like Anglican churches, you have a clear hierarchy, you have a clear structure, you have the bishops, and I'm actually going to an Anglican church now, and actually it's quite nice to know that those structures are in place. Anglicanism has had its messes. It's nice. All these things plague the Anglican church as well, but I can see the way that they're working through the safeguarding policy, the way the local church works. It's just, I'm getting there.
Yeah, I can see how that would be comforting, because so if there's a problem in your local church, there's a hierarchy above that church that you can appeal to. And, when I went through what I did at my church, part of the fallout of it is that one of my friends became Catholic, because she was like, who are these people that where did they get their authority? Did they wake up one morning and just decide, okay, I have authority, and, therefore I start a church and I'll be the authority, and then there's no other authority? So that actually led her to become Catholic, because she was like, hey, there's authority structure. At least if I have to deal with these people holding this authority over me, then at least the authority is coming from somewhere, not just,
Yeah. So I guess just to sort of explain, my understanding of eldership was that not only am I accountable as an elder to those above me, I was accountable to the church body. So when I was brought into eldership, it was the church body, the local one, that prayed me into that role and said, we trust you, Phil, to fulfill this role of elder pastor, whichever word you want to put on it. We called them elders. There was a guy from the accountability structure there in the room at that time, but he didn't know me, and that was even more evident when the mess came, because it's the same person that came to basically say what he said. But the church knew me, and so that was why I took it seriously, because I cared for them. I knew that they knew me. They'd known me since I was a student. So like, they'd seen me become to a point where they actually wanted to trust me in that role. And I always found myself to be like surprised that I was in that role. Like I was 27, 28 when they asked me. I still found toilet humor funny. I wasn't holier than them. And I just thought, well, if I'm an elder, I still need to be myself. I'm not suddenly one step removed in holiness scale. But through that, I also learned how to be an elder from people within the church. And they were the ones that were really teaching me how to be, they were discipling me. They were the ones that were discipling me. So when it came to this mess, I was going, we need to tell the church what's going on. We need to be transparent with them. They need to know. What was actually happening with the other elders was, no, we don't need to be transparent with them. We're going to keep XYZ secret because they can't know that, which was just arbitrary. And then when the accountability structure came in, they basically kept on with the secrecy and was just like directing the church which elders to go with when the church knew better than the accountability structure. And the church went, we know Phil, and we know he's not done what you said. And the accountability structure went, well, my name, because I was a volunteer elder, my name isn't on any of the like salaries, official documents, charity stuff. So it's far easier for the accountability structure to side with these other elders and just wait it out, because me leaving wouldn't be known. So yeah, it doesn't look good that they've lost 70 people of their 120 church. They just wait for enough people to leave and no one will know anymore and they can just carry on. Yeah. Sandals in the comments. Yeah, I'm glad. Oh, you and me.
Sorry. Okay. So how do you think churches should be structured now? Are you more comfortable with things like, you're in an Anglican church right now, but do you now think that there needs to be some sort of like hierarchy that extends beyond the local church?
It's really hard to say, because I mean, sin is in every structure. So no matter what hierarchy, no matter what accountability, no matter how we operate, sin is always going to be there. I think the safety comes from transparency, humility, repentance. Like, these are key things that were like totally missing from the mess. So I gave the example, like when they were saying sorry at the front, it was never, I'm sorry that I hurt our operations manager. I'm sorry our decisions hurt Phil. There was never been I'm sorry I called you angry from the front of the church and gave no context so that people think you're just an angry sod who just wants to burn the church down. Like, there's no like so I've just set the whole chat off on dodgy jokes. Sorry, guys.
Yes, Jerome says you're obligated to make a toilet joke now.
How to do that in the middle of talking about church mess? Yeah, I'll try and think of a crappy joke. Hey, there we go. So anyway, that was a dad joke as well. That's totally derailed me. So yeah, in terms of structure, it's about, and I'm starting somehow being part of a non-denominational church, and even though I've been a Christian my whole life, I've never read the church fathers, and that's a real disappointment. So I'm starting to try and get through the church fathers. And what's really noticeable in the early ones, and still early days, but the early ones, they're focused on humility and character as part of leadership and all that kind of thing. One of the things that really struck me, or it hurt when I saw it, was I thought it was right as an elder to try and apologize for my responsibility for what I could. So I'd been part of some of the decisions that led to a solicitor being instructed. I probably should have done a bit more homework. But I also said to one of the elders, I said, I'm really sorry that and I'd never been given specifics. I'd never been given what I could repent for. So apparently I was quarrelsome, but there was never any like this meeting, you just wouldn't let it go, and you called me this, and that really wasn't appropriate. Like, there was nothing like that. It was just, Phil, you're quarrelsome. And I think what he'd done is looked it up in the list of things an elder should be, saw the word quarrelsome. I was like, Phil, you're just really quarrelsome. You don't seem to let things go. And I was like, well, we've put our operations manager on sick leave, and there's an NDA being tried to put on her. Like, we're doing things wrong. So no, I'm not going to let it go. So long story short, I tried to repent. I tried to say, look, I'm sorry for when I was overzealous, when I maybe was a bit too strong. And what they then did with that was they went to the front of the church and went, Phil admits that he was too strong at times. And because of the way that he voiced his concerns, we couldn't hear what he was saying. So it's like, even my repentance was then flipped to attack
used
me
as an excuse for to excuse their own behavior.
Yeah. So, and that's just, and so a bit of humility and a bit of like character would have gone, well, Phil's repented. We won't use that. We'll find, we should have heard, no matter how Phil was, he's repented for being awkward and a jerk, even though I don't think I was. But instead of using that to be like, okay, we should have heard what you were saying, no matter how you were saying it, we're sorry too. It was then, oh, great, we've got something we can blame Phil for. I don't think that was, to sort of backtrack on my own tone there, I don't think that was their intention, but that's what they said. And they did that in front of the church. And so they need to and they've never taken responsibility for that. So I guess in answer to your question, any structure is broken, even the Anglican Church, as we are seeing at the moment, there's stuff going on where leaders have done awful things. Soul Survivor, I don't know if you've heard of Soul Survivor and Mike Pilavarchi. That's a big thing that's happened at the moment. I went to their youth camps when I was a teenager, so massive teenage festivals in the summer. And the guy who founded it is now being done for sort of bullying and grooming, and there's some pretty nasty allegations going on. And that's part of the Anglican Church. So, like, it's not, these structures do fail us. And if we don't have humility and repentance, they're going to continue to fail us. And I think within the non-denominational church structures, we've prioritized leaders who are charismatic, who are young, who are male, in the stream that I was in, and who are able to say the right things and get a following. And then when things go to pot, they don't have the character to go, you know what, I messed up, I'm sorry. So what we need to do is go back to the Bible, go back to our early church fathers and our history, and focus again on, well, who's humble, who's a disciple, who's relationally known. Maybe they can be, maybe they can be the leaders or people we trust. So just seeing what other comments are coming in.
Yeah, let's see. If anybody wants to put questions in the chat, if you have questions for Phil, you can put them in now and I'll start starring them. So what would you say? Because like now I think you've had a little bit of time to heal from the situation. So like there's other people who are struggling with this kind of church abuse, but also like even much worse church abuse. So do you have any like thoughts to share with people who might be going through something like that?
Yeah, it's really tough, and because the grievance, really, I'm like the scapegoat. The grievance wasn't about me. I would say my friend had it worse in many ways. She wasn't able to defend herself in a way that I was. She was allowed a statement read in the church meeting, but due to the way things ended in her role, there was still a clause that means she can't. It's basically a sort of politeness clause that you don't say anything bad against the church, but that's so vague that if you say the facts of what happened, they could turn it against you. And so I was able to put stuff on my blog because I don't have a name, I didn't have a salary within the church structures, so there's no real, as long as I didn't slander them or libel or whatever, then there's no pushback that I could receive. Whereas for her, there was salary, there was stuff, settlement and things in there that she had harder. So in terms of people going through grievance, it's finding people you can trust who hear you, believe you, but aren't going to enable you. Because I think the key thing is I was listening to people around me to tell me if I was getting it wrong. And I think that's where humility comes in, is I could have got this wrong. I'm not skilled up in employment law, tribunal law, grievances, all that. I was way too inexperienced to have the wisdom in that. But I had people around me who did have experience, and I kept going to them, have I got this wrong? Is this really what should be happening? Am I saying this wrong? Am I being a jerk by fighting this? And if you don't have people like, that's the difficulty when you're a victim, is finding people around you like that is really tough, and it can be really isolating and lonely. And I think trying to find that person who will hear you, and if you don't have that person in your church that will hear you, find someone outside the church who will. And I think our culture outside the church is actually getting better at hearing about victims and abuse than the church is. So it's not easy, especially if it's like the church that I was part of, which has basically become your life, like the community. Everyone knows everyone, and you're now saying this person's abused in whichever way, even if it's bullying rather than sexual or any of the nastier types of abuse. It may be better that you find someone outside the church who can kind of navigate the questioning reality that comes out of things like this. So I called a mate. One of the key parts for me was I kept getting told, trust the process, Phil, you're interfering, Phil, like just sit back and let us handle this kind of stuff. But no one was actually dealing with the situation. So I actually called a mate who'd been part of the church, moved, and I called him out. I didn't give any names. Eventually I did drop the name, and he's like, you didn't need to say his name. Like, I knew who it was that you were dealing with. And that was just like, oh, okay. So I am seeing this for what it is. And I think that's the thing that happens, is we gaslight ourselves into believing, oh, they can't really be that bad, or maybe I'm seeing it wrong. And you start questioning your own reality. So as soon as you can get some voice in there that says, no, you're seeing it right, this shouldn't be happening, I think that's the bit where you can start to really work through the next steps. But if you're in the middle of it, it's really hard to see. And I think just keep pressing on and believe yourself, like yourself.
Don't let them convince you that you're the one that is messed up when they're abusing their power.
Absolutely,
and that happens, unfortunately, a lot, is that, basically, and I saw this when you were going through the process, it was hard for you because the way that they were characterizing it was they were turning it back to make it your fault.
Yep.
When it was just you originally bringing a grievance. And actually, that was the question that Jerome put up here, which he says, I still don't understand what the main thing that forced you out of the church was. Was it a culmination of bad experiences or one big scandal? So maybe we can summarize in 1 minute
I'll do my best.
Happened. Or you want me to do it?
You can. I think just to respond to that is I still don't know. Like, I think I couched the whole thing is like, it doesn't make sense. I bumped into someone recently, and trying to summarize the last 12 months is just, it's really difficult because there's so much mess, and none of it makes sense. The reasons I was given to stand down were not biblical. I'd done nothing wrong. I've even been told I've done nothing wrong, even though they were giving me a list of things I'd done wrong. So it's like the actual grievance right at the start was pay wasn't getting done in an appropriate enough time. Emails were too curt, borderline bullying, and there's a history of that kind of interaction. It should have been just a short, let's take him off trustee board, let's interact relationally, we'll get through this. Instead, it became solicitors involved, mess, and more mess. So real simple thing.
So
blew
basically,
up.
leaders that didn't want to be accountable, they didn't want to respond to a legitimate grievance, and instead they just ignored, pushed, and basically passively aggressively pushed Phil and this
Yep.
other person out of the church.
Yep.
So here's wait, this is the fixed one. Sandals wants to know, is church membership important and or needed to be a Christian, and why?
What are your thoughts, Rebecca? I've talked a lot. I'll be interested in your response to that one.
Yeah, so I think being part of a church is important, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a formal church. It could also be, just a group of believers getting together. So the church is the people. It's not a building, and it's not, it's not an official entity. It is the believers. So I think if you are getting together with believers, then you are being part of a church. And why do I think that's important? Well, because we are working toward a purpose together. We are bringing the things of God's kingdom, love, joy, peace, and justice to the world in its present state, and we're trying to do that together. And we can, help each other and work together. Like if we're doing it alone, yeah, we can do some things alone, but you can't do everything alone. And there's some things that we need each other for, and we strengthen and encourage each other. So I do think it's important to be part of a church in some shape or form.
I think it depends on what you mean by membership.
Answer?
Yeah, I was just going to say it depends on what you mean by membership.
Yeah.
So initially, I don't think I've ever really been part of a church up until the one that I've been in for the last 17 or 18 years, where membership was really like, you need to be a member. And even then, in the church I was in, membership was quite light touch. It was, we know you're part of this church, you've committed to us, you serve on a team, potentially. That's not necessarily all of it, but it was a general expectation is once you remember, you're serving and you're giving. But it wasn't like hammered each week. And there wasn't like where membership goes wrong, I think, is when it's like checking in with you every day, like what are you doing, what are you tithing, who you dating. Like that's when you end up with heavy shepherding and problematic membership. So it really depends on what your church membership looks like. And I would say if it's as simple as you're part of a church body, they know you, you know them, great, please do that. If it's membership where you're signing a document, a statement of faith, XYZ, I think that starts to be where it ends up being all about power and authority structures, that you're kind of signing your life away to this organization group to dictate things to your life, when it should be mutually submissive. The elders aren't any more special in their Christianness than you are. And in many ways, they should be able to submit to you just as you submit to them. But there's an added responsibility when you're in the leadership. Jesus speaks very clearly about that. But I think membership has generally gone to a very one-sided, the elders dictate what I can do with my life, but I have no say in what they're doing with theirs. And that's the problem that I saw in my church.
Yes, I think that can be a problem. And there are some benefits to official membership, right? Like on paper, I mean, they may not play out well, like you said, like, but if like people aren't being accountable and stuff, but I agree with you. It's not, official church membership. In some cases it can be helpful. In some cases it can be harmful. It's just depending on how the church is using that. I mean, I was part of a church that like had the members recommit every year, and it was like basically signing a covenant for that year. And I don't know, I just thought that was a little bit strange. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think if it's done well, and you can speak into their lives, they can speak into yours, and it's relationally done, I think the paperwork is kind of arbitrary. Like, I think you can know who's in your church without needing a database. Databases just help you get the emails out easier. So again, I think it comes down to humility, power, how that's playing out in relationships. Are you able to get to know your pastors, your elders, outside of like the Sunday service or outside of the official events? Do they have you in your home? Do you have them in your home? That relational tie, I think, helps you navigate whether or not membership is heavy or not. And yeah, so I'm less tied to having official memberships, but that's also because I'm working out my own stuff. Like, so I think as an elder, I had an answer, so I can give you the answer I used to say, which was, it helps us know that you're part of the church, that you're committed to us and we're committed to you. And I know what that meant to me was that you can come to me and say, Phil, you acted like a jerk, can you sort it out? And I can go, sorry, yes, that's absolutely fine. But I know for other churches, it's you commit to us and we'll teach you and we'll disciple you, but you don't really have a say to us. And I think that's where church structures need to be rethought through, because we're making pastors and elders this untouchable group. That's problematic.
Yeah, I think you're making a good point about the leadership. They should be actually accountable to the people that they are leading as much as the other way around, right? Like, it's like, if somebody in church leadership if they have to say, well, I'm the leader, like, submit to my authority, then there is probably a problem there, right? Like,
get out of there as far as you can.
If they have to like bring up their authority, then that's really an issue. So,
and if you can tell they're not being honest with you, so there are very few things within church pastoral care that need to be like that the congregation doesn't need to know. Very few things that needs to be that confidential. And I think one of the things where I was just watching the church leaders put their foot in it and shoot themselves in the foot, because they were clearly controlling what people could ask and controlling what they said in a way that was missing information that people needed to be able to go, oh, we see that Phil acted wrongly there, or the operations manager acted wrongly, or even the trustee act. There was just no information. And so people, when they have no information, either panic and leave or start asking more difficult questions because they're not given the information that they deserve. They're part of the church. They've signed up to the church. They're donating their finances to the church. They deserve the information to be able to go with the elders with the full information, not just respect my authority, I'm your elder, which was what was going on in that meeting. And so why people left the church with me was because I then just did the opposite from that church meeting. I allowed them to ask as many questions as they liked. I did a Zoom call. I had 50 something questions that I was gradually answering. They were anonymous. People were allowed to ask whatever they liked. I had questions that were like, basically a direct attack on my integrity. and I didn't delete them. I responded to them. I was like, I don't think that's fair. I haven't had the information to be able to respond to that. And so, yeah, one of them was like, if you're basically interfering with church policy and employment law and you're basically upsetting everyone, isn't it right that you get asked to stand down? I don't know who said that, because I allowed it to be anonymous. And that's what gave people the information to go, this is no longer a church that I feel safe in. I'm going to leave, because I can see Phil is actually giving me the information. Sorry, that was me going off on one.
Yeah, well, I think I put this up on the screen because it kind of goes along too with what you're talking about. So what are your ideas about how church hierarchy can be made to be more transparent and accountable?
I think in many ways you can kind of see where it's going in secular culture to be more transparent before it's happening in the church. I think it comes back to how we've made eldership or leadership something untouchable, something separate from the congregation. They lead us, they teach us, they set the events for us. And then if it's a little bit less healthy, I think, then they dictate how I live. Like they give me information on what I should do with my life. And it's all one-sided, they to the congregation. And so I think from what I can see, at least in the early church and in Acts 2 and Acts 4, the end of Acts 2 and Acts 4, even how they get Stephen and the other blokes to do the food for the widows, like there's clearly an equality. There's not really there's a hierarchy potentially in structure and gifting. Those that can organize will be used to organize. Those who can teach are used to teach, but they're not seen in a position of like otherness. And I think that's what we're getting wrong. And so when you put someone in a position of otherness, they start acting like they're in a position of otherness, and they start not giving the information that people need to be able to interact well with them. They start being that one step removed from the congregation, that they have their little clique that they can be part of, but no other people don't have access to them. One of the things that I grew up with, I don't know if it's actually something my dad actually said, but it was something that I was very much aware of, is if you're in a church, you can't ask questions of the pastor, like any question, then it's not safe. And I think in that same vein, if you don't have access to your elders, pastors, vicars, whatever the denomination you're in, if you, a normal congregant, can't access your pastor or your elder on a one-to-one, on a cup of coffee, you're not in a healthy church. It's either too big, they're too other. And that would be kind of, I'm still working that out, how I feel about churches bigger than like 150 now, because I don't know how you can be transparent if you have bigger than that.
I totally agree. That is so difficult. And I like the way that you said it about people not having access to the pastor. That is a problem. Like, and especially because of the money issue. And this is one of my, biggest things, and is just the handling of lots of people's money, and the power that comes with that, and the struggles that come with that. And I think a lot of churches are having major problems because of money. And, so that's just a difficulty.
It is. That's an interesting comment there from Brogue High there.
I'm going through them. Wait,
Yeah.
I don't know which ones you're looking at.
So I'm looking at the one, the secular know more than something about the religious, and then one might even start thinking that you don't need religion to be a good person.
Okay, so go ahead and respond to that. I'll put it up on the screen when I get there. Okay.
Yeah, no worries.
The seculars valuing transparency more than the religious. Okay. So
yeah.
what do you think about that?
Yeah, and I guess it's this. I don't know what your background is, Brogue High, but a fairly common response might be that the church is there because we know we're not good people. I think we need Jesus because we know we're not good. So in that sense, being a good person is very subjective, and we know that all people are highly flawed. And I think what's going on in the churches at the moment, where it becomes, where it is becoming messy, is because people have forgotten the idea that that mess starts with them, and we lose our sense of humility and our sense of repentance and our sense that we all need Jesus. So yeah, I think you can be very much a decent human being and not be religious. That's absolutely true. A lot of my mates are non-Christian, and they're my mates because they're good people, but it's not being good that saves us. And if you've any experience of Christianity, that's the key part of the message: is we can't save ourselves, we can't be good enough. And so that's why I'm still part of a church, is because I know we humans are messy. And when church works, and I still cling to this, I mean, the church that I've had to leave, but the 70 people that came out of that church as well, they're still my church, even though I don't see them every Sunday. They're the people that got me through stuff when my daughter was diagnosed with a rare condition. So when the church works, it is a vision of heaven. When it's messy, it's probably a vision of hell to some degree, but I don't believe hell is going to be eternal torment. So there's a problem with that phrase, but it's a vision of everything that the worst of humanity can be, unfortunately.
Well, we can't forget too that the people that Jesus was the hardest on were the most religious.
Absolutely.
So as religious people, we are always in danger of becoming the type of people that Jesus is the harshest on, right?
Yeah.
So we probably have to watch out more than other people, just, watching out for things that would, make us self-righteous and make us, the types of things that Jesus stood against. So
yeah. So just to clarify on that, broke eye, before we go into another one, so it's the community aspect that's most important. I think with the community aspect, what I mean is when a community is sacrificially living in light of Jesus. And what I mean by that is, if you look at Acts 2, and again, it doesn't sound like you're part of a church, but if you are Christian, sorry if I'm preaching here, but just if you go to Acts 2, end of the chapter, and Acts 4 at the end of the chapter, that's what should be seen is a community that is sacrificially serving one another because they all love Jesus. Like the love of Jesus motivates them to give stuff up, to give material wealth to others, and you can see that's working because people are drawn to it in a way that they go, look, there's something different with this community. So I would say that's what the church I was part of was doing. Unfortunately, I don't think that's what it's doing anymore. But that's why we stayed for so long. And it's not just community. There's something more than that. And I think if you've ever heard of the Sunday service, there was a Sunday assembly in the UK back in Dawkins' heyday. I think it was early 2000s. Basically an atheist church service. They sung songs and they got together, and it was all about the community. And I don't think they're doing that well. I don't think they've lasted as long as Christianity has. So I think there's something more to when the church works than just be a bit beyond community.
Yeah. Paleo Logos said, could you tell us a little bit more about why you were in the church you were at present? Is it solely about authority, or did you have theological differences with your previous church?
That's a really good question. So in all honesty, I think my eldership role, I think I'd have had to start reconsidering it fairly soon anyway. So the church I was in was very much male eldership. If you're a woman, there's a ceiling. And that's partly theology is called complementarianism. And even as a student, I remember having issues struggling with the grounding of that biblically. It's not a thing I'd grown up in, but it was also something that I kind of got to a point of, well, if I'm part of if I go to any church, this thing is doctrinally I'm going to disagree with. This one, my wife and I were happy. I could see that women were preaching, and it was soft complementarianism. But even that, I was getting to a point where I was like, I don't see the theological grounding for this, and I'm finding it harder and harder to respond to newcomers in a way that doesn't feel like I'm contradicting my own integrity. So I think in that light, there may have been a change in the future, how that worked out. But in terms of where I'm at the moment, it's a really pragmatic move. So the church that I'm going to, it's an Anglican church, Church of England. They've got a really, really good special needs ministry. And so it's something my daughter now loves going to. So if they didn't have that, we would probably struggle to access any of the other churches in the town. We were just starting to get to a point where my daughter was able to get to kids work with someone looking out for her and looking after her for the whole time in the church that we left. That team it took about 2 years to really start getting there. So to find a church where we can, within a month, she's happy, she's got someone who knows her needs and can look after her, and my wife and I can attend the church. That's like, gold dust for parents with special needs kids. But in terms of attendance, like our attendance is still patchy. I still quite like sitting in the back, letting it wash over me and then leaving. So that's kind of like where I'm at the moment. But I guess we'll get there and be more involved as we go.
Yeah, makes sense. And Evidence and Reason says a charge against an elder must be done before the congregation. The accuser should face the accused. This discourages gossip. And he cited 1 Timothy 5:19-20.
Yeah.
So, he's and he says
Spot on.
this is a great example of how churches do not follow this. That and that 1 Timothy 5:19, I think it says an elder, if somebody's going to bring a charge against an elder, they have to bring a couple of witnesses, right? And so they clearly didn't do that in your case.
Absolutely. This is still, like, we've been talking for an hour. This is still the abridged version. Like, this is why it's really hard to make sense of this stuff. So in terms of misuse of the scripture, I haven't even touched on that really. We as elders instructed, as I say we, I thought we'd instructed an HR firm. A solicitor was instructed, and when the operations manager suggested that she might need some legal advice, it was 1 Corinthians 6. You don't take another Christian to court. That was used against her, despite the church, by the elders, despite the elders being the ones that got the solicitor in the first place. So it's like there's all these sorts of things where you're just like, how much do I share? Because it's just madness. But yeah, thanks for sharing that. It's absolutely right. There was no charges against me. I had no way to navigate that.
Matthew wants to know, is religion more likely to be true if it has less abuses overall? Ooh. If Islam has more abuses than Judaism, does that mean it's less true?
How people react to God doesn't impact, or how people behave in light of their understanding of God doesn't impact truth of the thing, in my opinion. I think that's fairly accurate. Rebecca, does that sound right?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I feel like it's true whether people behave well or not. Like, if it's true, then, and in fact, it's like, sometimes I feel like there may be more like maybe I shouldn't even go into this. I'm not going to go into that.
Okay.
But yeah, I think I agree with you, Phil. I don't think that abuses are like an indicator of whether or not a certain
true or not.
thing is true.
I guess sort of going down that a little ways, it would be, I guess, what is being defined as an abuse within that framework, religion or otherwise. So within Christianity, I think, and there are others that are trying to use the Bible in other ways, but Jesus quite clearly had a lot to say for the poor, the vulnerable, those in mourning, those suffering, those who are being oppressed. His kingdom is to bring healing and liberation and good news to the poor, to the lowly, and that's really visualized in the story of Jesus. And you see it, Philippians, I think it's Philippians 2 is the hymn of what Christ has done, that he's humbled himself and come into the mess, made himself lowly, and took on the lowest status to be crucified alongside a thief on the cross in the greatest shame, because he's embodying humility to then free us from death and give us life and honor and glory. So what that gives is a framework for looking at abuses and going, this is absolutely wrong. This isn't Christ. This isn't Christ-like. This isn't Christian. And so within the mess, while it was in the church, I have a framework to acknowledge this isn't Jesus in this mess. We are not acting as Jesus has called us to. When you look at the other religions, there's some question marks over the founder. Not Judaism, because we share a founder there. I think, particularly in Islam, there are some question marks over the founder, how he behaved, how the laws came about that seem to approve of his behavior ad hoc. And that would be where you go, well, how can I justify these abuses or is there one rule for me as a man? Is there another for a woman, which I see in Islam? So there's take on that worldview, look at abuse. What is the worldview telling you about abuse? Can it be justified within that framework? If it can, then I think you can be in good reason to discard that worldview. And I think Christianity gives us the best framework for lifting up those who have been abused and broken by others, even if it is within the church. I hope that helps.
Yeah. And I like Jerome's response here. He says, it's the genetic fallacy.
That's a lot more succinct.
Thank you for cleaning us up, Jerome.
There you go.
Okay, so this is just kind of a joke. I think B.S. Lewis says that the church is the body of Christ. Would Phil say Jesus is too fat?
How literal do you want to go? We're not talking about transubstantiation here either. Yeah, I think church.
No, it's not fat enough. We want to get fatter.
I don't know if fat's the right word. I think with the church, where I'm trying to go is sort of like the idea of community. People like the community of the church, but they aren't necessarily there to follow Jesus. So I think we'll always find mess within the church. We'll always find misuse of power within the church. Is it too fat? I don't want to say Jesus needs a diet like that. So
you want to get lean, huh? You want to shed some extra pounds.
I love some of these big bones. The church is big bone. Yeah, it's don't body shame the church. Yeah, maybe we just need to get the church to work out a bit and be a little bit fitter. I'm not sure about husky. Is that a word that's not translating well?
We use that for like big boned or like
really?
We have husky sizes in clothes and stuff like that.
Oh really? Okay.
Yeah,
so husky just means that you're like
a little chubby, chubby.
Oh right.
Yeah.
It's about we'd say someone's got a husky voice, which is like
they're a bit
raspy or like
Okay. The church, fake human says the church is comfortable following Paul's instructions to specific early churches than the bridegroom, than following the bridegroom. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think there's a potential in that it's I guess easier because it feels like Paul's written down some basic instructions and we humans like instructions. Jesus told us to love our enemies. That's not very easy to do. So we let's go for the instructions rather than for the humility thing. Yeah, I think there is an element that I think Paul gives instructions assuming we're following the bridegroom. And I think if we go for the instructions without the bridegroom, we end up with legalism and mess. That would be kind of, my response to that.
Well, I wanted to ask you, do you feel like there's any Bible passages that have become more meaningful to you now through this experience?
Yeah, it's really interesting actually, because a lot of Bible verses got misused throughout the process. So I feel like I know my Matthew 18 pretty well.
Yeah, for those who are not aware, that says something like it's like go to your brother. If your brother sins against you, go to your brother first and then
Yeah,
bring
it's the
witnesses and
it's the go-to verse for making people feel guilty for how they've brought their complaint. Oh, you haven't told me personally or in secret, so I could then justify it to you. So it's and then like don't judge and all those things. I guess where the Bible passages that I keep coming back to that mean a lot more, like what I just referenced in terms of Philippians and the call to humility, what church should look like in Acts. Even just going back to the Sermon on the Mount, going back to the bridegroom as fake human just commented. I think I just love that Jesus, the founder, is an emblem of humility, and that is what we should build any sense of Christian leadership on, is self-sacrifice and service. And I am the best leader I can be when everyone else is ahead of me. and that's kind of where I go to now for anything related to leadership. That's kind of become more personal. I think there's probably others, but off the top of my head, that'll probably be the one that stands out. You're muted. Sorry, Rebecca.
Thank you so much for sharing your experience today, Phil. And for
Pleasure.
those who are watching, if you want to hear more about Phil's experience, read his blog. The link is in the description. And check out Phil's Hell Project channel on TikTok and on YouTube. Do you have any final words?
No, I think if you're here and wondering why Christians are so horrible, hopefully the conversation has helped you rethink that a little bit. And keep asking questions. If you want to know more, do go onto my blog and feel free to connect there, or onto the Hell Project. The other thing I would say, there's some good people out there who have a lot of good things to say around church hurt, and I'd highly recommend follow her on Twitter or anywhere you can find her. I think she's on Facebook as well. Diane Langberg, and her book Redeeming Power is probably one of the best things I read around the topic. And there's a few others that I referenced throughout my blog as well. So there are people out there who hear victims, hear what power and poor church stuff does to people. And if you're stuck in it yourself, reach out to them. There you go. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah. Yep. Thank you so much. Okay. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.
Cool. Thanks all.